All right, everyone, thank you so much for joining us for Docs Let's Talk, the National Commission to Address Racism Nursing Report discussion.
Who we are. Our mission is to serve DNPs of color through networking, mentorship, and advocacy to increase diversity in doctoral studies, clinical practice, and leadership. Our vision is to inspire, empower, and transform the landscape of nursing by increasing diversity in the doctoral nursing practice.
So this event is brought to you by our DI Anti-Racism Advocacy Committee. My name is Dr. Danielle McCamey. I'm one of the co-chairs.
And I am Dr. Vivienne Pierce McDaniel.
With these sessions, there will be a total of 3 Zoom discussions. We also have facilitators for the subsequent ones that will be held on February 9th and 10th, and that will be Dr. Yvette Conyers, Dr. Angel Daniels, and future Doc Chadwick Ricks.
Our objectives tonight are to discuss the National Commission to Address Racism in Nursing, the Racism in Nursing Report, to encourage participation in the call for public comment. Please, please, please do that. And to empower docs to be integral in discussions around racism in nursing. The purpose of these sessions is to offer an opportunity for all to share thoughts, ideas, and reactions to the National Commission to Address Racism in Nursing Report. We also felt it important to host this space to promote awareness and encourage your participation in providing feedback on the report to the American Nurses Association. Please note that this is not a group venture. We encourage you to please go to the American Nurses Association website and provide your individual personal thoughts and feedback.
So we really want to create some buzz on social media. So if you are active, we would love for you to use the following hashtags so that we can create some awareness and some discussion around this event tonight. So hashtag Docs Let's Talk, hashtag Nursing Racism Discussion, hashtag Nursing and Racism Report, hashtag DNPs of Color.
And Dr. McCamey, if you could please put that in a chat, that would be great. Can you put the hashtags in the chat?
I'm going to have to ask Angel to help me with that if she wouldn't mind.
Okay.
Taking me a minute, Danielle.
Oh, we're getting help. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Linton.
Excellent. All right, so I'm going to move forward.
So we have some conversation agreements. We want everyone to be open-minded and to listen and respect all points of view. Acceptance, we want everyone to suspend judgment as best as you can. Actually, I say please suspend judgment. Curiosity, you should seek to understand rather than persuade. And discovery, we want you to be inquisitive, question assumptions, look for new insights, and speak from your heart and your personal experience. And brevity, we want you to be honest and be honest and in depth, and please don't go on and on and on.
All right, our Zoom forum guidelines. please raise your hand to share a comment. Keep your respondents under 45 seconds if possible. Please mute. Camera is optional. Use the chat to comment, and at the end of the session, network by posting your social media handles and LinkedIn links.
All right, with that, let's get started. So the first half of the discussion will be looking at the history of racism in nursing, a review of the historical scholarship. And then the second half will be looking at the systemic racism in contemporary society. We'll open up with a brief overview, and then for open discussion, we do have some questions that if we aren't, to help moderate some, facilitate some discussion. So feel free to put any comments that you have in the chat, raise your hand, because we would love to have a lively discussion. So with the history and racism in nursing, a review of the historical scholarship, this was written by Dr. Tobel and Dr. D'Antonia, and they describe this piece as a historiographical essay, which is an established form of essay reviews, relevant published historical research that addresses issues central to examining issues of racism in nursing. It moves forward in historical time to explain the evolution of relevant questions and issues. At times, it segues into earlier periods and other areas of significant historical research to explicate important themes. And it ends with suggestions to further areas of research that might help nurses understand the complex and complicated dimensions of racism in nursing. But we must begin with nursing's own origin of story. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen so we can all have gallery view to help foster some discussion.
Dr. McCamey, if you could ask the first question.
Sure. So in reading this piece, what were your initial reactions to the historical essays that were written in this report? Feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute.
I don't see any hands raised. Okay, I'm going to call on some people. I see some.
Dr. Conyers has her hand up.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for having this first of 3 series. Really appreciate the opportunity to dialogue. But I would say, the first thing that stood out to me, and although the authors do say this, and I've talked briefly with someone earlier about this, the authors are white. And again, they do admit to being white, but I question, even though you have the context of history of nursing, we're talking about the history of racism in nursing. So why could not, the authors could not have been Black? And sort of what was that barrier to not having authors of color specific to this chapter? And then, the other thing that really just stood out is, the first course, nursing's origin story, we see big old Florence Nightingale. And I think that has been the lens and how many of us have been taught, but I still think that narrative needs to change. Of course, it goes in more to talk about Mary Seacole and the journey and things like that. But I think the 2 things that stood out to me are the authorship is white women, although they do say that, but then also they still start with Florence Nightingale.
Does anyone want to comment about that? Madeline, were you trying to say something? Because you're muted.
No, I was just agreeing with Dr. Conyers' sentiment. How can we move forward if our foundation is still stuck in what many of the individuals in this room know to be not necessarily a fallacy, but just broader than what we have been taught for decades And I know that I've talked to Dr. McCamey about this as well. But as much as history that we have, or albeit limited, there is still so much that has been consciously omitted that needs to be brought to the forefront and acknowledged before we can truly make change.
Okay. Is there anyone else? Please raise your hand. We want you to be as interactive as possible.
In the chat, someone wrote continuously eliminated.
Oh, sorry, it should say constantly. I was just going off, and I'm sorry, I wasn't looking at your name when you spoke. You just said, consciously eliminated. That should have been my bad.
No, you did write that. I
Oh,
apologize.
okay.
I read it
Yeah.
wrong.
I think that's just key to realize. It's not like it's unconscious. You don't know the history. The history we're being taught is just like much other history, but the history in nursing specific to tonight is consciously left out for a purpose. So I was just highlighting that point.
Okay, is there anyone else that would like to speak on this? Don't be silent.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm sorry, I just joined you, so I'm not really sure what the subject is. So
Okay.
I apologize for that.
Dr. McCamey, do you want to read the question again?
It looks like Dr. Lowry has a comment, so I'll just unmute her so we can. And
Thank you.
Come back to you,
I'm gonna mute
Deborah.
Deborah.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. I just wanted to say that I agree, although they did disclose that, that they were primarily white writing this up, but I do think that to try to improve this, there needs to be more, we need to be more intentional about trying to be involved with this as we are tonight. And just more involvement too with health policy and seeking the opportunities to be involved with these organizations to help change this narrative that is still being shown.
Thank you for that. Yes.
Okay, Christine, feel free to unmute.
Hi, thank you. And also thank you for the opportunity to speak. So I am new to how these commissions work. I know I was invited to work with colleagues across the country last year on a project with the ANA related to healthcare providers, nurses, and climate issues. I'm just wondering who was, it says that the report was commissioned by several folks representing the National Commission to Address Racism in Nursing, but was there any effort or attempt to reach out to colleagues of color to collaborate in creating the report? Do we know that?
That's a very good question. Yes, the commission, the team, they were very diverse. Very diverse. We had Dr. Dawson from the National Black Nurses Association, I believe Deborah Toney. It was very diverse.
I just
Okay.
posted in the chat. I just posted in the chat the link to the ANA website that lists all the organizations that were comprised of the commission that participated. And as you'll see, it was anywhere from men in nursing to minority nurse to sororities to National Nursing Association. So if you click that link, it outlines the consortium of organizations. But great question.
And thank you so much. And I believe that the reason why, and I'm not trying to make any excuses, but I believe that they said in the report that they were historians, and that was why I'm not sure, but I thought I read that somewhere, that they were historians. I don't know where I read it, but
Yes, it's in the opening, kind of the opening paragraphs and statements. So I guess my question is, how does this happen if the group was well, people were well represented in the authorship?
yeah, those are good questions to present when you answer. When you go to the link and answer, those are legitimate questions to ask them in your feedback. And I'm sure that you will not be alone, because I've had at least, and I am not exaggerating, 200 people to ask me that question. So do we want to, do we still have time, Dr. McCamey, to answer that? Or do we want to move on to the?
We have one more hand raised. I think it's Dr. Conyers.
And let's not forget Deborah as well, please. Oh, you're muted, Dr. Conyers.
Sorry. I don't want to be the one, I hope everybody else, feel free to jump in and take a look. And please know I have this up as I'm on, so I'm sort of refreshing. But I think it's interesting. Think about when you learned about the role of midwives and midwifery. What did you learn about it, or did you not learn about it when you were taking your OB class? If you're an advanced practice nurse, who did you learn about as the father of gynecology? Those things are highlighted in the report. But I think, what stands out to me is that when we look at the number of midwives now, especially the number of Black midwives, there is a reason why that number is so low. And just like I tell my undergrad students, we have to go back to asking why. With the creation of obstetrics specifically, and surgeons, and then other nurses who were part of professional nursing organizations that Black nurses weren't allowed to be a part of, there was a push to decrease the number of Black midwives because it wasn't considered a practice that was okay or healthy for women, etc. But culturally, they were using practices that, healing properties and things like that, that's how they survived. And so I think it's important when we look at the history of midwifery, we look at who is representing midwives now and how that demographic has changed. But also Dr. Lowry talked about policy. When we look at things such as the Omnibus Act, we look at why that's created to address Black maternal mortality, right? And even Black infant mortality. There was a shift there. Right? There's a shift, and now we're coming up with policy to address things that we had a solution for. So I just think we need to think about that, but also bringing in the policy piece.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Deborah, did you want to, did you get an opportunity to read the question?
No, I'm actually doing the same thing. I'm sort of reading at the same time. So I'm going to pass for now.
Okay, thank you.
I think Dr. J has something to share. Dr. J, did you want to unmute yourself?
I just wanted to agree with her that the granny midwife was pushed out, and that's who took care of the slaves and the masters' wives, and they came over from Africa and were basically villainized once the birth was put into the hospital, and birth was looked at as a disease rather than as a natural occurrence, and it had to be sterile, and so they pushed it into the hospitals, and they made people feel that that was the best way to have babies, and basically locked out the midwives. So it is definitely on the rise right now with the information about Black maternal mortality. I was on a call last night with 95 either doulas, students, or people that wanted to go into midwifery, and they were all of color. So it was a pleasure to be on that call last night, and from all over the country. So the push is definitely there. There are a lot more Black nurses and non-nurses that are trying to go into midwifery to help address the maternal mortality problem in this country.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I actually wrote an article last year about the Black midwife for the Virginia Nurses Today newspaper, and it talks about the history.
Yes.
I'll try to find the link to it.
Right.
Okay, Ashley also wants to contribute. Ashley?
Hi, good evening, everyone. Dr. Ashley Graham Perel, and please pardon me for having my camera off. But I sensed that we were possibly shifting to the next question, and I just wanted to comment on the first one, if that's okay. Dr. Conyers, I fully understand and hear you, where you mentioned that the history was done by 2 white historians. I am a nurse historian, and I'm a Black historian, and I also noticed that. And history can be very troubling to the soul, right? You're reading these things and it's quite troubling to the soul. And they're both noted historians. So I know Pat D'Antonio. I'm working with her currently on a project, but I do think that there is power in taking caution if you were to write a history for something that you don't personally identify with, to have an expert person there that can truly identify and empathize with the content. So for example, if I was to be brought in to write about transgendered health, I don't identify as transgendered. I will bring in someone who can truly supplement the data that I'm writing. So I fully heard your point, and I did notice that as well. And I will be honest and say I was a bit disappointed in that as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We all needed to hear that tonight. Thank you so much. Do you want to move to the next question, Dr. McCamey?
Well, I do want to offer one more question before we wrap up the history. So what kind of things from this report can help us come up with some action items or points to consider to share in terms of feedback when we are looking at writing down the history in nursing, when we're trying to kind of discuss how racism has evolved in nursing history? Does anyone have any thoughts? Madeline?
Excellent question.
Thank you, Dr. McCamey. And this kind of piggybacks off of what Dr. Conyers was saying in her opening statement. We need to be intentional about who we mention in our histories, correct? So that those who are learning have representation to identify with. One of the things that I have, struggled with as a young Puerto Rican girl in central Pennsylvania is that there was no representation of my history in history books. So who am I? And so we have to be intentional if we're trying to push, rightfully so, our history to ensure that we utilize specific figures in order to make people feel seen and included.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Any other thoughts on how we can learn from history to move forward?
Can I comment?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it's important to recognize where professional nursing organizations that, sort of have like Chi Eta Phi sorority founded in 1932, National Black Nurses in 1971. I think I'm going to get to answering your question through this, Dr. McCamey, but I think it's important to realize how and why those organizations were created, but to also think about how those can continue to be organizations that are sustained and also that are included in reports like this. And I believe that the National Coalition of Ethnic Minority Organizations was included in this, but I think it's important that those are the intentional things that we include people who historically have been marginalized or excluded for so long into these conversations, and that we also continue to support those groups. And in a conversation I had earlier, thinking about how those who are in these places, like these authors, maybe could look at joining those types of organizations as well to support the mission and the vision, to making sure that maybe they can network or find other historians who are nurses of color to help with getting their information out and making sure they are correct.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Ashley, did you want to offer some thoughts as well?
Yes, just a very brief thought to comment on your question. When it comes to history, I always say if it's not written and acknowledged, it can easily be erased and forgotten. So I make it a point to truly include history in my courses, no matter what course I'm teaching. And I think that's a powerful note. Whether you're teaching leadership, fundamentals, that should be an objective to identify and respect the history and to then move forward. But if we're not mentioning it in the classroom, I think we're truly being a disservice to the future generation of nurses and to the public. So that's my little tidbit.
Thank you so much. You know, the matter of slavery is of the utmost of importance to African Americans. And I was sharing with Dr. McCamey and Dr. Daniels earlier that space matters, you know, and it's where we come from that influences how everything that we do. I mean, it influences this report. And so when you're saying these things, I definitely can relate to what you're saying, you know, because we're not saying that you have to be an African American, a Black person, to be able to give voice, but you certainly should have some really deep-seated experiences, you know, and exposure. So I would be interested in knowing how much that exists with the authors.
There's a question in the chat that asks which historical figures are missing and should be included.
Very good question. And that wasn't Ashley, that was it Elda?
It was Kristen Delavo. Oh, I hope I'm
Oh,
not
I think
messing
it
her
was,
name up.
and Madeline, I believe.
Hi
Madeline.
there. Hi, it's Kristen.
Okay.
I'm here from Clinical Advisor, and we would love to know what historical figures should be in there. Maybe the team needs to know exactly how this should be altered.
So I was looking to Madeline to see if she could answer that question.
Future Dr. Seltzer can probably offer some insight. She's from the Project Nurses You Should Know. So Joanna, you want to go ahead and make some comments?
Is she?
Technical difficulty for a minute, sorry. My partner, soon to be Dr. Raven Aponte, and I, I'm an EDD student, she's a PhD nurse historian student. We have, since last year, profiled over 100 nurses of color in order to close the representation gap. I posted it in the link. I also can post a shared document that we are working on for essential reading to Dr. Graham's point that we need to really integrate it into our curriculum. We didn't see really accessible content in order to do that. And certainly in the middle of the pandemic, we felt like we needed stories that were really engaging and compelling to spark people's curiosity to want to learn more, because history is not always seen as relevant to where we are in the present day. So I'm happy to get anyone on the call. It's a shared Google Doc. I'll put the list that we've aggregated so far specific to Black History Month, and we'll have one coming out for Asian Pacific heritage, Hispanic heritage, Native American heritage. And we want to be able to really have people build their libraries and know what the resources are. So we're working on kind of creating the content that is missing right now in our profession.
Thank you so much. And I think Raven just chimed in as well, but we're going to move on to the second portion of the talk, and that's going over the systemic racism in contemporary society. I'm putting the link in the chat. So if you want to bring up the document to kind of follow along, and I'll have Dr. Daniels introduce with an overview of this section.
Hi, yes. So systemic racism in a contemporary society. So what is the extent to which systemic racism exists in a contemporary society? Even now in present times, racism continues to reveal itself through legislation, criminal justice, employment, housing, healthcare, education, and political representation. Recent social and health justice movements sparked by widespread media attention regarding police brutality and the disproportionate morbidity and mortality of COVID-19 have resulted in the medical community's own reckoning with its contribution to these disparities in health outcomes and hindered advancement of health professionals. In the current reality, it is very important to revisit and examine the relationship of privilege, power, and prejudice. So as we think about that in contemporary society and systemic racism, what was your initial reaction to that section? Yes, Dr. Collins?
I think for me, the alarming statistic that 92% of Black nurses have recently experienced racism in their workplace. And that was a 2021 citation. 92%. To me, that's, I want to say it's surprising. Should it be? Yes, it's surprising. It's a lot, but not only that, the other statistic was 76% of respondents attested to witnessing it. So it makes me think about allyship too, in terms of, okay, you witnessed it, so what? Like, what are we now doing? What's the action behind this to create change? So those are the initial things that stood out to me, that 92%, especially of Black nurses saying, yep, I experienced racism. And then the number of sort of bystanders or witnesses.
Yes, thank you. Another hand, Dr. Yvette Lowry.
I would just like to say the first thing that came to my mind was the discrepancy of people of color being in leadership roles, whether that's a clinical setting or even in academia. And also the misrepresentation of those of color in specialty areas for a clinical focus. So I think we just need to be more intentional about displaying those of color that are in those areas. I think seeing is believing, and some nurses, especially if they didn't attend a HBCU or if they're in a predominantly white area, it can be discouraging, or you could feel that you're not worthy or capable, or that it may be too hard to get into those positions or those areas. So that is systemic racism to me when it comes to our profession.
Anyone else like to comment or have a question or comment? I see something in the chat. Policies such as how can we wear our hair or be true to us is an issue contributing still. Absolutely.
Dr. Reyes?
Yeah, thank you for putting this together tonight. And I really appreciate everyone's comments thus far. I think the one thing that extended from the previous conversation to this one that really struck me as I was reading through these documents was, you know, as the National Black Nurses Association, as the Hispanic Nurses Association, as all of these were coming together, it's the same time that nursing made the decision to make the BSN the entry to nursing practice. And it really struck me about, you know, where we see the greatest numbers of diversity and where we start to see that dwindle down. And then, you know, how the what people were saying right now in terms of the representation of what the students see in schools is also very differs from, you know, the different levels. And so I think it's, you know, I think as a nursing professional, we really need to put our money where our mouth is when it comes to diversity issues, to say, if we believe in, you know, in diversifying, we really need to put, you know, the resources there so that students can attain it.
I see a hand raised, Deborah.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on, I mean, similar comments, but you know, my experience, I'm one of maybe 2 African Americans in our specialty of cardiology, and I am like the only one with my doctorate. And unfortunately, my institution failed to recognize me when I shared that information with my leadership team. So it certainly did feel as though, you know, I was not valued and I would not be recognized accordingly. And that still hurts to this day. Um, and now they've gotten to where it's sort of one of those incentives now with our APPs. But when I established that beforehand, it was not even recognized. And I don't know if it was just my department, because I have a colleague who completed the same program, got her DNP, and she was thoroughly celebrated by everyone in her department. I mean, there's like a big poster with a big old face up there, and they had food and everything. And I just felt so small. And I gotta tell you, my mood was just bad almost for a whole year. You walk around, you do your job, but if you don't feel valued, you don't feel like you have the support where you can even have someone, okay, let's bring you in on a project. And I'll even volunteer, I did the IRB thing and everything, but it's like, it really does matter where you are. And I think the culture it can be superficial and you really just hear a lot of rhetoric. And that's probably the most frustrating part for me, at least, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Dr. Conyers. Yes, a sense of belonging. I've heard colleagues even say that they felt the imposter syndrome, a sense of not feeling like they belong in that place, that they're the imposter there. Hey.
I hear these stories almost every day when people call me to ask me for their help as an advocate for nurses' civil rights. And so, you know, I'm no longer surprised, but it is very unsettling to hear these stories. These are the stories that should be shared openly. So I appreciate all that have added to this discussion.
Okay. Any other thoughts? I mean, what else resonated with you? What about how systemic racism impacts, advancing in the profession of nursing?
Hey, I'm Elisa. I'm actually a DNP student. I wanted to say I kind of it's kind of hard to really see it clearly. So I think some of us, some staff members, some nurses I've met have trouble putting it into words what has occurred to them. I think we have to come up with terminology to refer to for nurses when they are like overlooked for promotions and their skill set is not being utilized when it comes to raises and when it comes to pay and things like that. I think we just probably could get together and provide support as far as the verbiage goes and when it comes to the subtlety of it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. We had a comment, systemic racism creates the fear of not belonging, discouragement by the pressure of MDs, CEOs, making you feel like that imposter or not appreciated by administration. Dr. Lowry, Yvette Lowry?
I would even include my own personal experience. I remember when I applied here locally, I'm in Florida. I applied locally to 2 universities that are predominantly white. And one of them, I applied for nurse practitioner school. This was back in 2010. And I got waitlisted and I had like a 3.5 GPA out of college. No C's on my transcript. I was certified for ICU, and I had to come in and do an interview. It was a group interview. I felt that had a systemic racism component to it because, I know when they send out decline letters, they're very generic. However, when I tried to reach out for better explanation, there really wasn't one. And I know working in my area at that time, there was very few people who had certification and, now it's more promoted, but there were other things that I had done, such as precepting, helping with evidence-based practice within my unit. I had worked for 11-1 trauma center, things like that. But I felt that situation had a systemic racism component to it. And it was initially discouraging, but I mean, I continued and moved forward. But I also think that this is where we're starting to see more students go into online private schools and subsequently spending more money on their education. And I mean, I can go on, but that is also something to think about is our methods of admitting students and have, I guess, in some ways having a blind approach, but then again, also being intentional about having adequate representation in the student body, especially in traditional settings.
Absolutely. Thank you. Madeline?
Yes, thank you. Specific to your first question, Dr. Daniels, about what can we do to start to eradicate the systemic racism. My experience, I'm a DNP candidate right now, but my experience is surprise that as a Latina who is a DNP candidate, I am more than an LPN. So when I mentor students who seek me out and they are of color, I encourage them to bypass that step. And so I mentor them, I sponsor them. This is a joint effort. You will make it through RN school, whether it's a 4-year, course, or whether you have to do the community college and then start that way. But I think as a profession, we have to start promoting that these individuals are more than what society tells them. That would be my first thing. And then Dr. Lowry, as you were speaking about your experience, I had an experience myself where I decided to initiate pursuing a postmaster certificate at a local university, predominantly white. They decided to get rid of those postmaster certificates, and I applied to their DNP program and was denied despite being successful in the program. I got a generic denial letter that told me I'd been denied to the incorrect program, so a program I hadn't even applied to. And when I reached out to get some feedback, not necessarily saying, hey, you made a mistake, but can I have some feedback as to what my areas of weaknesses are so that I can work on them and then pursue my long-term goal? My response was 3 sentences. So that again is also very, very discouraging. So I agree with you. But I think that as we start to elevate our younger nurses into realizing that they can expect more of themselves than what society has programmed us to expect of ourselves, there will be strength in numbers.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. And I agree that, right now I teach an undergraduate program and, our school was not very diversified and they're trying to increase that through the holistic admissions process. However, as we start to diversify and accept more minority students, what I hear faculty saying is they're just letting anybody in now. Can these people even critically think? I mean, it's a lot of negativity. And that, so when I'm there, I'm mentoring the Black students or students of color to say, this is not your final stop. You can do more, you can elevate, you can go beyond your BSN. So I appreciate your thoughts for sharing. Thank you so much.
And if I can just add to that, Dr. Daniels and Madeline and Cassandra, going off of that too, I think it starts with encouraging folks, don't just go for the RN associates or the RN baccalaureate like in New York State. BSN is the expectation. Even if you graduate with associates within 10 years, you need to get your bachelor's, and other states may follow suit. But I think it's important too that, in terms of what we can do regarding usually like structural institutional racism, looking at who we're admitting as students to and eliminating some of those barriers. Many times there has to be an essay written, some type of admissions essay. Many times, they are discrediting the fact that I'm a single Black woman with a 6-month-old applying to your nursing program. And so my obstacles that I had to face is going to make me even more of a greater student because of my life experiences. Yet you want me to have a 3.5, 3.75 GPA. And that may not be it for me, but nursing isn't all about numbers and grades, and you all know that. So I think, really looking at holistic admission that AACN has done, even so, who's on the search committees for new faculty, who's interviewing the staff, are they looking at questions that are filtering out bias and things like that, that can cause a good fitting candidate, right, to not come in. All those things I think can have a impact on the continued structural racism that is embedded in organizations. And we just need to, we are better in numbers, encourage each other to keep going on for education and get in these boardrooms and these suites and begin to make change at a higher level that will trickle down.
Absolutely. Have that seat at the table.
Yes, I'm always an advocate for the seat at the table and even taking over the table, which is the essence of DNPs of color mission and why the focus is on elevating nurses of color to the doctorate level, because nursing has been so traditional in elevating the doctorate degree, historically PhD, but over the past decade, over 40,000 DNPs have matriculated through programs to 7,000 PhDs. And with the AACN changing the essentials for bedside nursing from bachelor's prepared for direct entry and then doctoral prepared for advanced practice, I think that encouraging and having spaces like DNPs of color to encourage, inspire, and also mentor the future nurses of color that will be occupying the doctoral nursing practice space, so that we can be invited to these tables. Because as we all know, in order to be faculty, to have tenured professorships, you have to have your doctorate. To have certain leadership levels within nursing, you have to have your doctorate. So I agree, having the mentoring space, creating these spaces that foster the networking and mentorship and advocacy that we're doing here in DNPs of color. And then of course, having these conversations where we are elevating our voices and our stories, exposing the various ways that racism hides and how we being people of color can perceive it, and how our emotional intelligence is a little bit different. Sharing that so that those that don't have our lived experience can at least try to understand or at least hear our stories. I do want to invite Cassandra to speak because she's been very active in the chat, and also Sharina too.
Hi, it's Dr. Samuel. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So one thing that I recently was invited to participate in is the Holistic Nursing Review Committee. That definitely has kind of opened my eyes to the students that we're allowing into our institution. Before, I'm not quite sure how they were doing it, but I'm happy to know now that the team and the committee is very diverse. There's a couple of us nurses of color on this committee, and just making sure we're doing a thorough nursing review, holistic review, and making sure that our student body is very diverse. And also our faculty, that's very important because they look to us whenever they're applying for these schools, like, who here looks like me? And I think that's very important. So yeah, if you have opportunities to join the holistic review committees at your institutions, I think that's very important.
I would just like to add, just to tag on to what you just said. In order to move us forward, we do have to sit at these tables. We cannot decline them. We need to be active. For those of us that are really in positions of having a voice, use that voice so that we can bring others up to the table with us. Because if we don't use our roles when we are in those positions of leadership or in a position to be heard, then it's, we're not helping. So I think if we can try to be more vocal about it and intentional, then that's a step in the right direction as well.
Does anyone have any thoughts as to how we could encourage those that identify being part of a community of color to help advocate or elevate communities of color voices in the nursing space, in leadership, just to give some thoughts as to how they can be of help?
Hi, sorry, I'm not sure. Can you hear me? Oh,
yes, we can hear you.
Okay, good. Sorry, I had to step away. I definitely had a few thoughts on that. Having been in nursing for some time, and I've seen many different aspects of it. Graduating from my APN program, I previously mentioned, I was one of 2 Black students. Currently, I'm in a DNP program, and I am the only person of color there. And just in my workplace, I'm in psychiatry, and just in my workplace alone, I'm always encouraging, BSN nurses, I'm always encouraging LPNs, to further their degree, just encouragement and just to promote themselves in the arena. I can say and even in education, I can say when I was an undergrad, I didn't have that encouragement, even from people that looked like me. If anything, they told me this is it. you're not going to go further. So it's like even in education, in the workplace, just in every direction, if you see someone that is in an LPN position and BSN position, tell them to elevate and not to be afraid and not to feel discouraged or not feel unsupported. Just giving everyone that support that they may need to elevate themselves.
Absolutely. Dr. Lowry, did you still want to say something? You had your hand up. Okay, Dr. Cynthia Stacy.
Hi, thank you for bringing us all together. I'm a DNP candidate, but to the question about what can we do to increase the number of people coming or to attract people to the DNP role, I think we need to do a better job in undergraduate, showing that there is work other than in the hospital, because in hospital settings, at least the two that I work for, the DNP role is a question. People don't understand what it is. So being really clear and having roles delineated for DNP. Someone spoke earlier about when they worked in their role, they volunteered to do work and no one ever accepted the fact that they were volunteering to do IRB. So being more visible, knowing what a DNP is and what we do as DNPs. So that's just some of the thoughts that have given this whole topic, because as I talk to nurses at the bedside, I'm always like, you should go back to school. Let's go back to school. And they're like, well, this person went back to school and they're still working at the bedside. So having delineated roles for the doctorate nurses with the DNP. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing. I agree. I know that, in previous positions where I worked in the medical group, the actual doctors would bring the meeting to DNPs. Some of the things that they felt that, it wasn't a relevant degree, is what I heard at one point. Madeline, you had yours, and then Christine.
Just to piggyback on what Cynthia was saying, you made me think of something that is actually happening in real time at my organization right now. Is the executive leadership is not valuing the contributions of nurses who do not practice at the traditional bedside. So they are not evolving along with practice. And so there is a little bit of a morale challenge right now in my organization for those of us who have chosen to diversify our nursing knowledge and expertise in the hopes of getting to higher levels of education or leadership. Second, and it's just food for thought as I'm thinking, as I'm listening to all of the individuals on this call who are already DNP prepared and of color. Do you ever feel that once you are invited to the table, that you have to sacrifice your authenticity in order to remain at that table? That's something that I struggle with. And the easiest thing that I can say is when I am passionate about something, I am angry or acting, ethnic. But when a Caucasian counterpart utilizes the same energy, it is accepted.
Well, I'm very unapologetic when I'm at the table. And let me tell you, I bring my voice to the table. I expect to be heard at the table, because a lot of times you're just at the table. No one is listening to you. You don't have the opportunity to voice anything there. You're just there. And when I come to the table, I bring every bit of my passion to the table. And I challenge anybody to accuse me of being an angry Black woman when I do so.
Thank you, Dr. Pierce McDaniel. I just want to offer, what are some tips for those that that struggle or have difficulty with bringing that type of energy, because they're either the only one or they're either new to the space, new to the table. How do we encourage those to kind of have that energy? And then I'll have Dr. Lowry, she's had her hand up, so.
Oh, Christine had hers up first and then
Okay.
Dr. Lowry.
I'll just real quickly say thank you. Be aware that even those of us who are Caucasian are I have been accused of being uncivil any number of times, because when I get passionate, I also can sound a little bit angry. And the comments to me about being uncivil in my communication tend to come around the idea of, let's light a fire under shifting to holistic admissions. I'm seeing these great students in my interdisciplinary pre-nursing courses that I'm really promoting and encouraging to come into the program, but we don't have the holistic admission process yet. And so like somebody else, colleague just mentioned, if they're not a 3.5 or better student, the process is impossible for them, despite how passionate I can be in my advocacy. But the other thing that I wanted to add to the idea of preparing students to come into the DNP programs, I teach in the undergraduate program. I decided last week that for every discussion board that my undergrads do, they've got to be finding source material from the literature, citing that material, trying to help set them up for success so that they can write their essays and they can, position themselves well to be accepted into the DNP program.
Thank you, Dr. Lowry.
I would just say for me, I'm in a point in life, and I can tell people when I'm on these committees, these boards, if you want me here, you're gonna have 100% me. And I think that you can be completely authentic, but one thing that you wanna do when you're using your voice is also to have the action behind it. So, have your suggestions and have your voice, but take an active role in whatever it is, whatever table that you're on. I think that is going to be what ultimately is going to be respected. I think somebody may not always agree with what you're saying, or they may not understand where you're coming from, but your actions to move things forward and to make it, whatever it is, better, that will always shine through no matter what, your approach or how you're perceived, and they will later respect where you're coming from.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Dr. McCamey, do we have time for more questions or?
We're at 8:12, so we can take 2 more questions.
Let me interrupt very briefly. Dr. Conyers, I'm calling on you to let these beautiful people know why we are wearing red tonight.
Oh, well, all right. I had to find my little red head thing because I was like, I don't have another red shirt, but we are wearing red to bring awareness to cardiovascular disease, specifically heart awareness in women. Today is the actual day, February 4th for this year, that we do so. So that is why we have on red.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. McCamey.
So we are coming to a close. It's 8:13, so if anyone has any last minute comments, feel free to share before we close out.
Hi, this is Deborah again. I wanted to go back to, really connecting with our undergraduate students, and I think that's really where my passion is, to kind of help develop that pipeline where we can mentor. But I didn't know, is it okay to request African American minority students specifically? because we do, and it has to go through a vetting process. In my organization, you have to go through the school of nurse, the Department of Nursing. They have to have these contracts and everything. But I feel like, again, that's where perhaps we kind of draw the short end of the stick. I want specifically to work with minority students. I don't know how to really go about that. To be PC, I don't want to burn bridges. So I'm not really sure the best way to go about that.
Thank you. We have one more hand up, and Ashley Graham.
Oh, yes, I just wanted to thank you all for having this forum. And I know that when we discussed this, our discussion was so layered, whether it's talking about systemic racism or the history of nursing or our imposter syndromes and so forth. And Nelson Mandela said, it always seems impossible until it's done. I know we're all climbing our own personal mountains and trying to tackle really big issues, but I just wanted to encourage everyone to just breathe and know that you're doing your best and take one step at a time, because I understand that it becomes very stressful. I just finished my EDD last year from Teachers College, so I understand the journey. I encourage you to breathe and know that it will be done and there could be a solution to these problems.
Thank you so much. That was an excellent way to close. At this time, we invite you to network a little bit. So please feel free to post your email or your social media handles in the chat before we officially close. And we thank you for joining in on this discussion. This is the first of 3 discussions that we'll be having around the National Commission to Address Racism in Nursing Foundational Report. The next session will be February 9th and February 10th at 7 p.m. Eastern. You do have to register, so you can go to our website, www.dnpsofcolor.org. Also, we'll put in the chat the link to the ANA report so that you can put in your feedback. And Dr. Pierce McDaniel, did you want to give any tips or advice on when feedback is submitted?
Ask me again, I'm sorry.
When people are going to submit their public comment, any tips or advice when submitting?
Oh, just please be honest, and even though they have your name there, because you have to post your name, and you have to, I think your email address maybe, just be very honest about how you feel. I mean, that was one of the reasons why we wanted to have this open discussion. And if you don't have the opportunity to do all of the different reports, please select one that you're passionate about and just respond to that one. Those were instructions to me from Dr. Grant. He said that if you cannot complete all of them and provide feedback for all of them, just pick one that you're passionate about.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pierce McDaniel, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight at our first discussion around the National Commission to Address Racism in Nursing Foundational Report. Please be sure to follow us on all the social media, check out our Twitter at DNPs of Color, and we hope to see you at the next event on February 9th. Thank you everyone and have a great night.
Before you go, Dr. Latrice, it was recorded, so you will be able to, you will